Good evening, everyone. You're going to see a little questionnaire pop up. We'll do one at the beginning, one at the end. And I'm just going to give a minute for folks to trickle in, and then we'll get started tonight. Again, for those of you who've just come in, you should see a little pop-up right in front of you. Fill that out and then exit out, and then we will get started in about 30 seconds. We're going to slowly get the ball rolling here. My name is Tal Kitron with Appleruth. I am a tutor and executive function coach. I've been tutoring SAT and PSAT and ACT and some LSAT and other stuff for a little over 10 years now. And the SAT has gone through some changes, most significantly last year, changed from paper to digital. So today we're going to talk about what the digital SAT is and what it isn't, structure, strategies on verbal, strategies on math, some information about scoring, and then techniques you can immediately apply to a practice or a real SAT. As we go, I'm definitely going to leave some time for questions. We're scheduled for an hour, but it should take probably more like 45, 50 minutes or so. And then if you have questions, just put them in the chat as we go in the Q&A, and I will answer them at the end. The SAT is still out of a perfect 1600. So the lowest score you can get is a 400 just by showing up. You get a 200 on verbal and a 200 on math. And the highest score we can get is a perfect 1600. One of the biggest changes with this digital test is that it is section adaptive, meaning based on how you do on module 1 and module 3, the second and fourth modules will be much harder or easier accordingly. And we'll talk more about that, but it's not question adaptive, it is section adaptive. So if, let's say on that first reading module, you do very well, that second module is going to be a lot harder, but your scores floor and ceiling will also be much higher accordingly. And then same for math. So if you find yourself in the lower level module 2, it'll be easy, it'll be smooth sailing, but that's not good because our score ceiling is much lower. You probably can't get above like a 590 or so. So what does this actually mean? Again, sections 2 and 4 will vary based on how you perform on sections 1 and 3. And we're going to go into like the Blue Book app and how it works and how the test itself looks. But know that the second module will adapt in only one of 2 ways. There's not like a medium module. It's lower or it's easier. In adaptive testing, so there used to be these single test forms, and you would then be able to kind of talk afterwards. You're not supposed to, but you could, everyone kind of had the same test. Now there's a lot more test security and variation just because of the digital nature. And because of the adaptive nature of the test, earlier questions can affect your scores a lot more than later ones. Meaning, let's say that you missed 3 questions out of all of the 44 math questions. That's very different if you missed them on module 4 than if you missed all 3 on module 3. Right? If you missed them all on the first, the easier math module, that might cost you like 60, 70 points. Whereas if you missed them on the last module, it might be 10 or 20 points. Right? Significant. And it is true that on modules 1 and 3, questions are simply worth more. So important to nail those 2 modules. Logistics. So how is the actual SAT taken? Most of you or your students have taken the PSAT this way. So what we do is on our device or school provided computer, you download what's called the Blue Book app. If you search that online, it's very easy to find. It'll probably take a moment to update, and then you'll be able to launch it. Then within the Blue Book app, which has practice SATs and also like a link to your official SAT page, like your College Board account, the week of the official test, once you've registered, there's also a little Blue Book process for the student to kind of click in. It's just a little yellow button. The test itself, so it's not secure enough that people take the test at home. You still have to go into a testing center. So everyone's on the computer, you bring your charger. As soon as you launch the Blue Book app, then it blocks other apps from running. And that previously downloaded test will be unlocked on test day. The switch to digital has been good. It's been a lot more efficient. It's a shorter test, which is good, but human proctors don't have to manage the time anymore, so they can't screw that up like they often do. No more of those Scantron sheets where, oh, crud, I realized I just bubbled in 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4. May have noticed there's a lot more school day testing. So sometimes they just offer these Wednesday SATs for seniors in particular. And as I said, the security much better, but also accommodations are improved. There's a lot of different accommodations. And I think the time and a half is now more significant because the test is shorter. Results come back. It hasn't actually been that much faster, but within about 10 days. And then the tests themselves, like I said, are quicker, shorter. So that saves us time and energy, but yet it's not a huge time crunch like the ACT, for example. And this the digital adaptive SAT is in its second year in the US. It's been around for a little over 2 years now internationally. And I really like the test. I think the ACT is actually making big changes accordingly. There's a presentation about that on Wednesday. But the test is now shorter. It used to be over 3 hours. So that means if you had extended time, like time and a half, you're there for almost 5 hours. And for a student with like ADD or ADHD, if that's where we have extended time, that's a blessing and a curse because yes, I've got enough time to finish, but if I need the time for lack of focus, sitting there for 5 hours is not going to be wonderful for most people. But now, if we have time and a half, it's more like 3.5 hours. It's not like too terrible. More time per question. We'll look at that in a second. The verbal sections are now combined, and there's very few grammar concepts. So they are crucial, but there aren't that many. No more long passages. They're all short, and they cover a very wide range of topics. You'll see anything from like a science blurb in a magazine from 1996 to a 1609 Shakespeare sonnet, but they're all going to be short paragraphs. And you can use a graphing calculator throughout. There used to be a no calculator section. They don't have that, and there's actually now a built-in Desmos calculator, which we'll really talk about a lot, how to use that to full advantage. Here's what the test looks like. So section 1 is 32 minutes for 27 questions. Section 2 verbal is also 32 minutes for 27 questions. And depending on how you did on that first module, it'll be much easier or much harder. And then same for math, you get a bit more time, but there are actually fewer questions. So 22 questions in 35 minutes for both modules 3 and 4. They've also built in these experimental questions. This is not something that you guys need to sweat, but I just wanted to mention that. Including, so what it is you get modules 1 and 2, so 32 minutes, 32 minutes back to back, but then you get a 10-minute break. And then you do the math sections. Way shorter than the old SAT, quite a bit shorter than the current ACT. But like I said, the ACT is changing and shortening and becoming digital eventually. The amount of time per question significantly increased. So it's not like a huge time crunch, backbreaking pace, which can be really nice. Still, a lot of students struggle for time on modules 2 and 4 upper level. So we could talk about how do you prioritize easy questions, skip around, don't be a perfectionist, because the SAT is graded on a curve. So you don't need to get every question to get a fantastic score, right? You just need to do better than the people next to you. And sometimes it's better to get a question wrong in 30 seconds than it is to get it right in 2 minutes, which can be very hard to embrace. Here, just a little bit more of some more stats on how much more time per question we get. And again, someone asked just for repetition on how many questions are on module 2. Yeah, modules 1 and 2 are both verbal. So let's go back for a moment. Modules 1 and 2 are both verbal. They both have 27 questions. And we're going to look at each question type and how it's broken down. So 27 questions for 32 minutes for 27 questions for the first two, 35 minutes for 22 questions for modules 3 and 4. I mentioned this, but 8% of the questions-ish, so 8 of the 98 questions total on the test, are going to be experimental, which means they won't end up counting. This is so that there's not like, there used to be an additional section 5, which terrified students. So I would have to warn them, hey, if there's a section 5, don't worry, it doesn't count. Because the College Board would do it to collect data for future tests. Now, instead, they've embedded these experimental questions to gather data, so you never know like which ones they are, but there are going to be a couple, especially funky questions per test. Again, this is something as a test taker, we just can't really worry too much about. So let's talk about the question types and the strategies for each and really dig in. This is an older slide, but it still applies. The one thing I will say is, okay, so these strategies apply for both verbal and math. And the first thing is to actively read, which used to mean pen and pencil in hand always. Marking up the test booklet, right, and just underlining and circling and starring and taking notes. You still get scratch paper, so I still think that that can be useful, especially on math. There's also some tools we'll look at where you can highlight and look at maybe transition words, right? So making sure that you are paying close attention, actively engaging with the text. Slightly less important than it used to be only because the passages are shorter, but still crucial on module 2 upper level. The answer eliminator we'll look at, that is a very important tool. I would use it constantly, always have it on the verbal. And the Desmos calculator for math is a cheat code for like 60% of the questions. Just knowing that puts you way ahead of the game for of most people taking the test. And then don't leave anything blank. So if there's a free response question, of course, that's hard to guess on. But for the multiple choice, which is a vast majority of questions, no points off for wrong answers, so you may as well guess. I put C. There's a myth that like C is correct more often than other answers. I don't think that's true. But what you do want to do is, let's say we're running out of time. We've got 5 questions we haven't gotten to. Not the end of the world. What you want to do is go straight down the line. So A, or B, or C. That way you won't miss all of them, probably. Statistically, you're likely to at least get 1 correct. So that's just a good guessing strategy if you do run out of time, which does happen. So let's kind of look at, again, the content and question types. Each of the verbal modules, you get an average time of a little over a minute per question, but not all questions are created equal. Grammar should take a lot less time and energy than a longer question. Same with vocab if we know the words. You can see here how the tests start. 1 and 2 are vocab questions. That will always be the case. And each of these will be just short passages, 1 question per passage, all multiple choice on the verbal sections. So let's spend a moment here. This is what you'll see as soon as you start the test. Like, this is the first page. You can see 32 minutes is clicked down to 31:59 on top. You can hide that on test day on Blue Book. Most people don't, but if it makes you anxious, you can hide it, at least for a while. That annotate button on the top right is allows you to highlight. I think that is marginally useful, but if, for example, you're a very visual person or you have extended time, I think it's more likely to be helpful. And that little ABC slash mark, so underneath the annotate by the question 1, that's the answer eliminator, crucial. You can still pick a correct answer with that engaged. And then mark for review is exactly what it sounds like. If you clicked on the black bar at the bottom, question 1 of 27, you would see all the questions with everything you flagged as a red flag. And then on the top right, more. So this is if you're taking a practice test, that's where you can save and exit it. So there's a few other things there, and you just really want to get familiar with Blue Book. Appleroot has SATs that are really good for practice, but the Blue Book tests have the exact right platform, right? It's on the test you're gonna, or on the same exact app you'll take the test on test day. So for this question, I would look at A and B just as a kind of a little bonus hint. Allow versus allows means this is a subject verb agreement question almost always. Because those aren't different tenses, right? They're both present tense verbs. The difference is they allow, it or he or she allows, singular, plural. So that's kind of a clue from the test writers. Oh, probably this is testing that. One of those is right. And the subject may be way before the verb. In this case, the subject is the joining, the act of joining plants his upper halves. Joining, singular, it allows. So the answer is B, even though there's many plural nouns that make us feel like A would be an answer. If we have time at the end, we can come back to specific questions if people have issues or questions. These are going to be questions 1 through 4. So again, this is, I think, really important in a way that you can get a very good score even without understanding everything and missing questions. Questions 1 through 4 on verbal are just about always vocab. And the strategy for these is, what I teach my students is black out the words if you can, don't look at the answers, read the passage, predict the word or phrase or vibe if it's just positive, negative, and then eliminate. So again, the strategy for vocab questions, which starts off both verbal modules, is read the passage, predict your own word or phrase, if you can, and then eliminate. So like here I see frustrated. So I know it's going to be something negative. It's not A or C in the end. And then if we read, it's frustrated with the blank, and this author coined a new term. So we could say obscurity, which means that the existing terms are obscure and not very common, or limitations, which means this person was frustrated with limitations. B is a better answer here, but if you get it down to B and D, right, you eliminate and narrow down, that's more what I'd be looking for as a tutor, right? Because that would mean you've got the strategy down, and once we know our vocab words well, we'll do very well on these questions. So again, that's always how they start. You don't have to do these first, but I would say most people will. And then from questions 5 to about 16, so the middle of both modules 1 and 2, you're going to get the longer questions. And this is one example. The strategy for these, this is command of evidence without a graph. And so any longer question, you're basically going to read the question on the right side, then the passage, and then eliminate. It's a very simple strategy. Don't pick a good answer. Go with the ones you know are wrong. So like here, which quotation from the spring most effectively illustrates the claim? What claim? Let's go find out. The Spring is a 17th century poem. In the poem, the speaker compares the changes in the season to the attitude of his beloved, and then colon, which is a drum roll introduction. So the claim is that the speaker is comparing the changes in the season to the attitude of his beloved, a person. Then we're going to read these answers, which are all very confusing. A, now that the winter's gone, the earth hath lost her snow white robes. I'd be uncertain, maybe, keep it. B, no more the frost candies the grass. Sounds more like just about nature, not the person. So probably not B. C, same thing. I see swallow, cuckoo, humble bee, but not anything about a person. And so it's got to be either A or D. The issue with A being her is personification of the earth, and D feels like maybe we're talking about a person with pity cold. So the sun is warming up and melting, but her heart is still congealed, and she's not full of pity or warmth. This is a much harder question. So a lot of people will look at this and think, my gosh, I have no idea what to do here. All these words are like totally different language. If that happens, try to eliminate, get it down to 2, pick and move on. Just don't spend forever and you're going to be okay. right? We can miss some of the super hard questions, especially on the second level. So that's command of evidence. Inference is the other type of long question that I think is the hardest, and it will always look like this. Which choice most logically completes the text? That's the boilerplate language. And that's your sign as a test taker to read the passage and infer, not assume too much, but make some sort of logical inference. So for this one, I won't read it out loud. Everyone can just take a moment to read it. I'm going to look at some of the questions people have submitted. We'll go back to the last question in a moment because people are asking what the answer was. For this question, and I know I didn't give you too much time to read it, but like minute and a half to 2 minutes is generally about as long as I'd want to take. Here they're talking about polyurethanes. Anytime I see a connector, I would highlight that. The problem is they're difficult to recycle, can't contain harmful chemicals. So there's this alternative they're researching. Initial tests have been positive. There's a new process to recycle. So now they just need to consider whether they're bio-based foams, what? Well, I don't need to talk about C because that was just a very side note here. That'd be my least favorite answer. And then create comfortable cushions. Well, it doesn't really talk about comfort ever, although it probably should. So no. And then A and B will be appealing, maybe, but then if I look at this, durable, versatile, that really matches well to varied and durable. So we know we can recycle them, but can they be as varied and durable? Right, in a session, or like if we were working through this with a student, we would take a little bit longer just to think about why are C and D wrong, right? And how do we get down to A and B reliably? And then just real quick, that last question was D as in dog, because that's the one that talks about a person and nature, person in the seasons, whereas B as in boy only kind of talks about, sorry, A and B both only talk about the seasons. The earth has lost her snow white robes is a metaphor saying there's no more white snow covering the earth. This is important. And so I've talked about 1 through 4, some of the questions from 5 through 16. 17 to 27 are grammar and then rhetoric. This will end every single verbal module, is anywhere from about 2 to 4 of these questions. And the very simple rule is 4 out of 5 times you can completely ignore these bullet points. So like here, we can just try that. Our job is the student wants to introduce the research of Aubrey and Schmidt to an audience already familiar with global warming. Well, let's see if there's any answers that just don't introduce their research. Like again, on test day, I might take a bit longer, but neither of them mention the names, so I doubt it. And then B, global warming continues to be a major concern. Well, if you're already familiar, we don't need to say that. And then I'm not sure they introduced the research that well there, whereas C introduces it very nicely, kind of tells us what they're doing. And if we now erase the bullets, we can prove it. But again, we usually do not need that. All right, so again, 4 out of 5 times on those bullet point questions, you can just read the right side of the page, meaning get to these questions. Do not end on them. Do not run out of time on these, even though they're at the end. I think it's super important for everyone to get to these with plenty of time to spare, which might mean skipping some of those longer questions, right? Like this is definitely easier and quicker than something like this or this. I think we can all agree those are hard compared to that, which was pretty simple. All right, so it's all about pacing and using your mental stamina and energy in smart ways. Because even though it's not a long test, it's still draining and there's still a lot of test taking strategy that can help. And then finally, from again, I'm 17 to about 24, grammar. And there are not many types. Clauses and punctuation would be the most common and the hardest. So just a little intro to that. A lot of people learn this and have forgotten or learn it incorrectly. Commas are actually the most difficult. So I would test periods and semicolons before I test commas. And I'd actually test colons before I test commas as well. Because commas separate ideas that can be hard to pinpoint, whereas periods and semicolons are virtually identical, and they must separate two full sentences. So I can test that really easily. Is there a full sentence before? Is there a full sentence after? Oh, then yeah, semicolon works. And if not, then not. And then a colon must have a full sentence before it. That's important. That's a rule. A colon must come after an independent clause. And then those two dots, you think of it like a drum roll, please. I had one great passion in life. Drum roll, please. What was it? Making pizzas. So those are rules you'd have to be really comfortable with. And if not, you go practice. I'll give you some resources towards the end today of where to find good practice resources for this stuff. Here's an example question. And right away, you want to go to the answer choices for these types of questions. And like I said, we're going to test semicolons and periods first. And unless something weird is going on, they're the same. Semicolons and periods function the same exact way. Therefore, they're both wrong. They can't both be right, and they're identical. So then we can just look at C versus D, reading the paragraph and thinking about, can we get away with no pause, or do we need a comma? And here we would get the comma, it'd be D. Again, the lesson for grammar is always start straight from the answers. Semicolons are periods on the SAT with one exception. Sometimes they use like a bunch of semicolons in a list. So if you see that, that's an exception, and hopefully you'll see the parallel structure. But the general rule is semicolons are periods. They both separate two full sentences. And this part is not a full sentence, right? That's the other reason why grammatically A and B are wrong. And here, if you say the study of fungi producing more than 350 paintings, that's all one idea? I don't think so. The study of fungi producing more than 350 paintings, separate idea. Our answer here is choice D. These, again, are the important questions to master and get to, even though they're towards the end of the section. Much more important to grab this than spend 2 minutes trying a Shakespeare question. And then also in this 17 to 24-ish range, especially in the 20 to 24, this is where you can expect several connector questions, like at least probably 3. For these, look before and after, right? We can see in the answers they're testing transitions, and just decide, is there contrast or not? Organisms have evolved a number of surprising adaptations to ensure their survival in adverse conditions. Tadpole shrimp embryos blank can pause development for over 10 years. That sounds like an example of a surprising adaptation. So I go B. There's definitely no contrast, so A and C are the two worst answers. All right, so B, because the second part is an example of the first sentence. This is back to the middle of each verbal module, so command of evidence again. We won't do this question, but know that graph questions on module 1, sometimes there are 3 answers that are just false. Like you look at the graph and you're like, wait a second, that's not even true. More often though, especially on module 2, all the answers will be true in the graph, and we're gonna have to read that passage carefully to find the one that's relevant. So for graph questions, I recommend read the question, read the passage, and then from each choice, carefully going back to the graph. So is the graph crucial to treasure? Yes, but we don't really look at it till we're evaluating each answer choice, which can be a little bit counterintuitive. And again, we'll have some time at the end for questions, but I want to make sure we cover a good amount of math stuff because there's just a lot of new and interesting things and little tricks I think I can help with, just even in the short term. This is a reference sheet that is provided. Note the special right triangles and the 3D shapes, Pythagorean theorem, and then some area formulas. So it's just if you ever forget anything like that, right? It's been a while since we've done geometry, so you got to knock off rust, but also remember that these things are there. They don't provide stuff like SOHCAHTOA, so sine, cosine, tangent, you got to remember that. Quadratic formula would be helpful, vertex form of a parabola. There's a few little things worth memorizing, but it's more like 5, not 50. Our format, like I said, 35 minutes, 22 questions, which seems like not much, but it can get, if you've got like 10 hard questions in a row, it compounds pretty quickly. Even though you get a minute and a half on average, we're going to want to take 20 seconds on some questions and several minutes on others. The old SAT was more of a reading test. One of the biggest reasons they changed this was to help students who with English as a second language, but also it's just better. It's a pure math test now. So yes, there are word problems, but much fewer. It's mostly just in the form of modeling, not these really long logic questions that they used to have. And again, don't forget, they give you these formulas in the top right corner. 24% fewer problems from the old SAT, but again, more time, interestingly. So it feels and is much more manageable. It's a big point of the, like, in favor of the digital SAT over the current ACT, to be honest. And again, fewer words per problem. So less of a reading test, more of a true math test. On the digital SAT, only about 30% of the questions are in real world contexts, and the others are going to be just algebra, a little bit of geometry and trig, a little bit of stats. And even from compared to the ACT, which has 60 math questions in 60 minutes, but a lot of them are word problems, like this is very, very different from that in a way that most students like. And then I'll show you what this looks like these free response questions, but on each section, 4 of the 22 are going to be grid-ins. So you'll have multiple choice, A, B, C, D, but then there will be 2 questions, 2 sets of 2 questions on each module that are grid-ins. And it's a few more like spaces than we used to have. So like, let's say our answer was 3/5. You would just put in 3/5. But if your answer was, for example, 2/3, and you wrote 0.66, it would be wrong because you haven't used all the available grid-ins. So you have to actually grid in 0.6667 or make it a fraction. You can also grid in negative numbers, which used to not be the case. So a negative is acceptable. Hardest part about free response questions is that uncertainty, right? I got an answer, it's 12,374, but like there's no answer choice to make me feel like I nailed it. So that can be tricky. A lot of people don't love the grid-ins because of that. So here's the blue book format, very important. Notice the top right. That reference sheet is just geometry formulas. You can pull it up anytime and then close it. And that calculator is the most important thing on the entire SAT by far, by far. It's Desmos, which if anyone has used, they know how much that can do, but probably not like the full extent. It's a graphing calculator. So like it would make this question insanely easy. If I see which expression is equivalent, yeah, I'm looking at this and thinking about factoring, and I'm fine with that. But I can also just graph the original and graph each answer on Desmos, on the calculator, on test day, and see which ones are the same. The answer that directly overlaps with our original graph is the correct answer, and the ones that don't aren't. And we'll look at this. We're going to look specifically at certain questions and how to use Desmos, but I highly recommend that practice. You can even just go to desmos.com/graphing, and you can see the exact calculator they use on test day. Note the answer eliminator, probably less helpful on math, definitely less helpful on math. And we have mark for review, and we have the black button where you can skip around. Right, so pretty much the same. This is what the calculator looks like in both its expanded and non-expanded version. So you can type in expressions. The keyboard on the bottom has all that stuff, X and Y and absolute value even, and square root. And if you need something more complicated like sine, cosine, or tangent, or nth root, there are ways to just type them in, or you can go to that functions button. And so you can zoom in and out. There's usually a home button as well that takes you back to center, right? And so this is just something to really get comfortable with. Number one thing on this test. One of the annoying things is kind of dragging it around. So when you open it, it stays open. You can click out of it and it won't like unsave anything. But expanding it covers the question, which is just logistically annoying. And if you have it small, sometimes we just are zooming around and can't see enough. I would bring your calculator as well. So if you have a TI 83 or 84 and you're really used to it, bring it, especially for like degree questions, degree measures. It's better than Desmos. But for almost everything else, Desmos is better. Right? So I would definitely bring the calculator, no harm in it, but Desmos is huge. So for example, if they ask for a solution to a system, plug them in and see where they intersect. That way I'm not risking flipping a negative sign or an X or a Y. That easier first module is that much easier if you use it. So you won't need to, but to double check your work, to avoid careless errors, you can do even the easiest questions on Desmos. And some of the hardest ones. Here's the breakdown. Much more algebra heavy than it used to be. So 70% algebra, just algebra 1 and 2. I found with my students, a lot of the basic algebra is rustier than polynomials. So like we're good with the factoring and the x-intercepts and Desmos, but then when it comes to like parallel lines and slope and intercept, people are pretty rusty. 15% stats, 15% geometry trig. Those are also trouble areas a lot of times. Percent change, which Desmos can be really helpful for. Mean, median, mode, which you can do on Desmos, and then stuff like that, basic stats. Geometry would be more like area, volume, perimeter, and occasionally some unit circle type stuff. So a lot of that's knocking off rust more than learning new things, depending on where you're at in school. But most of my students are juniors in high school, and they've learned this stuff. It's just some of it they've forgotten, which is understandable. Strategy, just kind of, I added this slide just because I think it's good to have like a simple strategy always. Number one, what am I solving for? For each question, what is my goal? What am I solving for? Then you plan your attack. Do I have to write out math? Am I graphing it, creating an equation, or both? Don't skip steps. So write everything down on scratch paper they'll provide. And then make sure at the end, did I actually solve for the right thing? Did they ask me for X or 2X plus 3? Maybe I need to plug in to finish the question. And then this I added as well because I still want people to think about basic math strategy. It's just we can avoid it a lot of times by plugging it into the calculator. But algebra rules still apply, right? So if you have this checklist in mind, can I isolate a variable? Am I just trying to like move something to another side? Combining like terms is in most questions. Factoring and foiling is probably your best off learning how to do that on Desmos and translating x-intercepts to factors and vice versa. But still, you could do that by hand and it's usually fine. Distributing, basic math step, and then substitute, we do that a ton. If that doesn't work, maybe the answer choices can be used to plug in or make a common sense inference. If the answers are ugly, maybe we pick our own numbers. And never forget about Desmos because it is golden. I almost feel like I feel a bit fraudulent as a tutor sometimes now on SAT because yes, we can use the answers here and that would be a shortcut. You could also do the math, right? Like all we're looking for is which of these values is not a solution. But I'd probably plug this into Desmos too, right? So like this particular question is listed as working backwards because the answer choices are friendly. If you're more comfortable plugging them in to the answer to the inequality, then do it. Just remember you're picking the choice that doesn't work. But what I would do is I would probably graph this exactly as is. I'd punch it into Desmos, and then they're going to give you like this X shaded region. Realistically here, most students are just going to do the math, which I think is fine. That would be subtract 2x from both sides, treat it like an equation. So you get x plus 3 is greater than or equal to -5, and then minus 3 on both sides, and we have x is greater than or equal to -8. The sign only flips in an inequality if we divide by a negative sign, which we did not. X has to be greater than or equal to -8. The only answer of these that is not is -9. So if you didn't like that, then you probably would be a person who should put that in the calculator and or use the answers, right? So think about what fits your sensibilities, and you can recreate easily, reliably on test day without support from anyone else. Let's look briefly at this question. This is exponential modeling. This is a vestige of the old SAT that they still test quite a bit. And what you want to know for this, it's kind of like compounding interest, if you've ever done that in school, where we always start with the initial amount. So the first number needs to be not 2, but 100,000. And then the middle number is 1, which is 100%, plus or minus the percent change. If we are doubling, then it's 1 plus 100 over 100, which is 2. So hence doubling. And then it doubles every 12 hours, which means in one day it should happen twice. So that's when I would plug in t as 1 to these two answers. This doesn't cut it because that says it would take 12 days for this to double, whereas this says in one day it doubles twice. So this is your answer. And again, this 2t means it happens twice per day, right? So twice per 24 hours, whereas t over 12 means it takes 12 days for it to happen once. Once you see a question like this 2 or 3 or 4 times, you're going to nail it because they do the same thing over and over, right? These basement dwelling test writers are not that creative. They have to kind of write the same question types again and again. So that's what they mean by picking numbers. If I plugged in like 1 or 12, you can kind of see which answers do not give you the true result. So final thing here, going to take us maybe 10-ish minutes, maybe a little more, to look at the main content areas and some example questions, and then just Desmos. So basic algebra makes up 35%. This is going to be y equals mx plus b. Mostly just that. So knowing slope, knowing y-intercept, and understanding them deeply, but also knowing that f of x is y. Right? These are things we've learned, but some people didn't have amazing teachers, right? Or they learned it online, or it's just been too long. 35% though is significant, got to brush up on the basics. Here are two examples. On the left side, that's a Desmos question. Your best bet is to write them out as expression 1, expression 2. I will say though that if you distribute and then set them equal, you will see they both have the same slope, but a different y-intercept. If we graph those, they would be two lines that never intersect because they're parallel. So that means 0 solutions. 2 made no sense because 2 lines can never intersect twice. This would have been if they were the exact same line, and this is if they have a different slope, but they have the same slope. And the one on the right is more like, it's basic algebra, but it's modeling, and it's more like the one we just saw with the doubling every 12 hours. 1,200 acre industrial area, 1,800 acre residence area, this many devices in town, and this equation represents it. What is y? Well, y is connected to 1,800, so it's the residence, not the industrial. This is where it's kind of hard, and I think I can explain it, and some of you will be left still uncertain, which is okay. But the total number is 520, 400. So this is representing total, which means 1,800y is the total number of devices in the residence. Y is just the average, 1,800y over 1,800. Don't worry if you don't understand why it's B. Make sure you understand why it's not D, because this equation already models the total. And that means that 1800y represents the total for residence area. Much harder question, even though there's no math to do, but definitely tricky, definitely one that a lot of people will miss. Other 35%, so other significant section for math is advanced math, which is algebra 2 pretty much. That's exponents and roots, but especially quadratic, standard form, intercept form, and vertex form. So really understanding solutions and x-intercepts and how they relate and the vertex of a parabola, what it means. And then absolute value and some stuff about relating to quadratic formula as well. Some really tricky stuff with a lot of variables. So these are questions that, like among the hardest math questions, they'll probably be in this range. So here's a couple of examples. On the left is isolating, and I would do this by hand. Simply multiply both sides by the denominator to get rid of the fraction, and then divide by 3n to get rid of that on the left side. So actually D is just 2 steps and our answer should be, or sorry, the first one is 2 steps, our answer should be D. Again, multiplying by the denominator to get rid of the fraction, and then dividing by the 3n before you distribute. And then this is standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. But the question is, what's the height from which the ball was dropped, which is when t seconds, 0 seconds have passed. It's been 0 seconds since it's dropped. So if you plug in 0 right there and there, h of 0, meaning the value of y after 0 seconds, is just 600. That's your starting point. It's not your vertex, it's not your maximum, but it is where we start from. And then it looks like it's going to drop down. Again, trickier for most people, but lots of patterns. We can get used to it. Third major area is stats. So 15%, ratios, proportions, percentages, mean, median, range, and then a lot of probability. We change that to about 15. It's not quite 20%. Here's a couple examples. And I'll show you how to do the first one. And then this one is a Desmos question if needed. But for the first one, of 1.6 million tiles, 1.248 are ceramic. The easiest way to do this is just divide, but you can also say, you can put this in Desmos. So you pull up the calculator and say 124800, because I don't like commas, equals X percent. It'll literally spit out the word of, and then you'll write 1600, all those zeros. Maybe too many. And so if you do this, it'll literally give you an answer, a straight line that's an X value. This would also be fine to just divide 1248 over 1600. Right, we'll get one of these two. And then here, you can actually type in the word mean in Desmos and put all these numbers in with commas, and it'll give you the mean. My hope is that you look at this and see they're the same exact numbers, except for data set S has an extra 1, which would be smaller than any other number. And outliers like that do affect the mean. So the mean of data set S is going to be lower than T. That one's just B. And just for good measure, because I know someone will probably ask, 1248 over 1600, C on the left side. Final topic is geometry, and we're just going to look at Desmos and open it for questions. 15-ish% again, maybe a little bit less than stats. Pythagoras, right triangles, angles, and SOHCAHTOA. This is where scratch paper is at its most important, making sure you draw stuff out and remembering that we have those formulas if we need them. We won't do these 2 questions, but just here are 2 examples. The first one's kind of a Pythagoras question, and the other one is more about alternate interior, alternate exterior. So many people will be thinking, gosh, I learned this in 9th grade. I don't remember any of it. You're in good company. That's what most of my students say. And so then you do a little bit of review, knock off rust, and it's there somewhere in your brain. But just want to make sure we get to this and have time, because I've seen some questions coming through already. Desmos can solve a lot of questions by just showing you the graph. I don't use the tables function, but you can explore that if you've done that in school. You can do that. Definitely can practice. right? And so like that's what we're going to do today. This is a systems question. And like on ACT still, and I would used to on paper SAT teach, let's either isolate and substitute or let's eliminate, both of which are fine options. But now, no. You see this solution, oh, that's where they intersect. I'm not doing math. I'm putting it into Desmos and seeing where they intersect. This seems obvious, it seems basic, but I promise you many people taking the test won't do it. And it's graded on a curve. So if you do this, it's a huge advantage, time-wise and also accuracy. They asked us for y, not x, so our answer here would be 3. X is 5, y is 3, done. As long as you've typed it in the right way, you're golden. This one's a little different. The function above has zeros, which means solutions or x-intercepts. The question is, what is the distance between the two zeros? I mean, I do just want to graph it and check. And the beauty is you can actually click on x-intercepts of a parabola, like they did here, and you can see, well, 3 minus negative 3.5, that's a distance of 6.5. So my answer is C. 20 seconds, no math, just Desmos. This one asks for which of these correct answers is correct as far as points that are on this graph. And you can see A, B, C, and D all have X, Y points. Some of them have repeats, like A and B have some similar points. Same with C and D. We're typing it in exactly as it is. And you can even do the table thing, and that'll create a table of points. So I can see, well, negative 1, 5, and 2, 14 are both points, meaning my answer is B, as in boy. Negative 1, 5, and 2, 14. The hard part here would be remembering that h of x is just y, and just understanding the setup of this question, knowing there's not much to do. And then one of our final things, this would be a hard question, especially if we didn't have Desmos. So read that, and let's think about what we're going to do. And so again, on Blue Book, you can just click the calculator button. And if you've typed in the 2 correct inequalities, we're going to get this very fast. This is what this one looks like. So they're saying that the minimum of 150 tablets, that's the x is greater than or equal to 150. And then the other equation is about tablets and laptops. And then you just have this intersection point, and you can infer something from that. So like here, because we're asked about the maximum number of laptops, which is y, 102.3 is not an integer, so I can't go above 102 and still stay in the range. This is the hardest question we've seen today in a lot of ways, but the answer here is 102. And just want to finish because we've got good questions, so just want to kind of wrap up with a short recap. No matter whether you're on verbal or math, you always want to answer what the question is actually asking. On math, pay attention to detail and leave nothing blank. And everywhere, skip around, right? Make sure that if you're taking too long or too much energy on a question, you're like, I don't understand this. I've read the paragraph 3 times. Move past it. Not worth it. Usually on math, there's a simple solution, especially on module 3. There's usually like an easy way to do it rather than, very, very advanced or lots of inference. So how to practice. Appruth has 4 mock tests, and one more I think is on the way or maybe being revamped. Those score reports are super helpful. You can look at that on your own or with a tutor. And then there's 7 Blue Book digital SATs, 4 of which are either new or revamped. So that's available on the app. Same with PSATs as well for practice, which are almost identical to SATs. All right, you're going to see another little pop-up, and I'm going to open it up for questions. of which I've already got a few good ones. So if you are satisfied and want to call it a night, thank you for joining. You're more than welcome to. Just going to spend a few minutes answering some questions. First is, are we allowed to use graphing calculators? The answer is yes. So not only Desmos, but also your TI-80, whatever, you can bring that. And relatedly, so there will be Desmos on the test. Yes, there is a Desmos built-in calculator on the Blue Book test math sections. Then we've got a couple questions about one of the math problems. Let's go over that one real quick. I think that was probably referring to the inequality. Let's see if I can find it. Not sure, not worth it. As far as like actual specific questions, this recording will go out to those of you who registered on Friday, and so you'll be able to look back at it. But reach out with any questions that remain. All right, what else? So next question is, if I'm taking both the PSAT and SAT next year, so that means I'm assuming you're like a sophomore, and next year as a junior, you'll take the PSAT in October, which can be helpful for national merit scholarships. The question is, if I'm already studying for the SAT, do I study for the PSAT? No, they're the same. I mean, they're the same. PSAT is very slightly shorter, very slightly easier, but like not really. I mean, at this point, I think the question amounts and the timing is so similar that they're practically identical. So for a high scoring rising junior, I would focus over the summer. A lot of my students will be high scorers who are working on PSAT and SAT and try to knock out both of those fall semester of junior year. Another couple questions about like, what is a bad score? What happens if we score badly, or what's a good average score? Impossible to answer, right? So I'll just say, it depends on what school you want to go to. A lot of colleges are now test optional, so a test score does not define you one way or another. But take a practice test, see where you are. A good score is one that you improve upon and meet your goals. You can look at like percentiles. I think probably right now, maybe it used to be that about 1,000 was the 50th percentile, but most of my students wouldn't be totally happy with that score. But yeah, I think that there's no such thing as a good or bad score. And if you do score not up to your potential, there's really not much downside, even if it's a real test. Most colleges, vast majority, do not require you to send all test scores. Most of them, in fact, super score, which means they only look at the highest test scores from across multiple sittings. A couple more questions and we'll call it a day. One question is actually about what happened on the March SAT. I heard that SAT Digital Math sometimes can submit automatically 10 minutes before. In that case, what can we do? That should not happen. It was a glitch. For anyone that did happen to on the March official test, SAT is working to remedy it. But no, that should not happen. There was just a glitch for some people in the March test, but I've not heard of that happening. And then final question is just, can you retake the test, and when should I focus on studying? So one, yes, you can retake the test. It takes most students 3 official tests to reach full potential. So like you could take, if you took March, you could take May and June. A lot of students will take August, and now there's a September test in October. So if you're, let's say, a rising senior this summer, I would probably start thinking about it right after APs end. I would study and try to get your SATs in like August. I would say like June, August, September, and then last one in October if needed. Sorry I couldn't get to all the questions. Hope today was helpful and informative, and I'll see some of you again on Wednesday for ACT stuff. But have a wonderful night. Thank you for joining, and see you next time.